Good evening. I'm Erica Espindola, and thank you for joining me tonight as I will discuss the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. I will be analyzing several news stories as they have been presented in the global media. My research is an academic analysis in which I will be using concepts and theories such as framing, gatekeeping, the hostile media effect, and the reinforcement theory. The focus of this broadcast is to inform you on the latest Israeli-Palestinian peace talks in Jordan. And now I will shed some light on the history of conflict between Israel and Palestine. Over 6 decades, Israel and Palestine have been involved in tense conflict over land along with religious overtones. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict has its roots in the late 19th and 20th centuries. The inception of a Jewish state was conceived in the late 1800s, when European Zionists settled in Palestine. Eventually, the indigenous Arab population became increasingly alarmed, and fighting ensued. According to the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 181 of 1947, a partition was recommended, and the UN gave 55% of Palestine to the Jewish state. Following the partition, a war erupted between the two nations, with Israel's army outnumbering the Arab and Palestinian combatants. By the end of the war, Israel had conquered 78% of Palestine, leaving 100,000 Palestinians as refugees. There have been many attempts to make peace between Israel and Palestine. Numerous conferences have been held by several U.S. presidents to negotiate a treaty between the two nations. These peace talks have been occurring since the Arab-Israeli War in 1967. Now the status of the peace process is at a deadlock. With this brief history in mind, I will now discuss the background of the most recent news stories as they are presented in my research. New efforts to revive the peace process were made by Secretary of State John Kerry on July 29, 2013. The negotiations made during this time were scheduled to last a period of 9 months to reach a final status to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict by mid-2014. A deadline was set for establishing a broad outline for an agreement by April 29, 2014. On the expiration of the deadline, negotiations collapsed. More recently, on August 25, 2014, President of Palestine Mahmoud Abbas announced that he would be presenting a new proposal for the peace process to John Kerry on September 3, 2014. Abbas's plan calls for 9 months of direct talk, followed by a 3-year plan for Israel to withdraw to the 1976 lines, leaving Jerusalem as Palestine's capital. According to an article in the Times of Israel, Abbas stated that if Israel rejected the proposal, he'd join international bodies, such as the International Criminal Court, to file war crimes against the nation. As part of my research, I wanted to see how the media in Israel frames the peace process and how the U.S. uses their media to showcase it. As I present my analysis, keep these guiding questions in mind. Is the coverage of the peace process biased or neutral? What is missing in the coverage? And who is being portrayed in the stories and who is not? For my research, I analyzed 10 news articles, 6 from Israel, 3 from the United States, and 1 from the United Kingdom. The media outlets that I used for Israel is the Times of Israel. Additionally, I used articles from the news agency Reuters, American online news reader The Huffington Post, Fox News, and from the UK, the Daily Mail. The Israeli and U.S. view on the peace process is my basis for determining bias and identifying communication theories. There will be 4 communication concepts and theories that exist in my news stories and will better explain the bias in my research. These are framing, gatekeeping, the hostile media effect, and reinforcement theory. Framing happens when media professionals shape information that is being shared with an audience for a direct purpose. In order to understand the selection process of how the media chooses what stories to present to the world, we will focus on gatekeeping. In his article featured in the Journal of Communication, Raymond Pingree defined gatekeeping as a problematic form of media trust because it suggests ignorance of factors other than problem importance that influence news story selection. In other words, gatekeeping is a process by which news is gathered and filtered to audiences. Another concept in my news stories that is evident especially in Israeli news reporting is the hostile media effect. According to Scott Reed's article in the Journal of Communication, the hostile media effect is a phenomenon in which partisans on both sides of an issue perceive media reports to be biased against their side. The findings from my research of the news story show a substantial amount of bias from both the U.S. and Israel. There are 3 themes from the news stories that demonstrate considerable amount of bias. These are violence in the Gaza Strip, Palestinian leadership views, and land disputes. I found that 4 out of 6 articles from the Times of Israel show that violence in the Gaza Strip and from the terror group Hamas have swayed Israelis into thinking that peace negotiations are not possible. The Daily Mail from the UK also says the violent attacks in Gaza are causing the Palestinians to lose any sense of connection. The type of bias that is clear in the theme of violence in Gaza is called diction. Diction, or word choice, affects the way that the audience interprets the set of events in the media. The Times of Israel uses the terms kill and terrorism that in turn create negative emotions by the viewer. Leadership views are a recurring theme in my news articles that have a tone of condemnation toward authority. All 6 articles from the Times of Israel show criticism of Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. One news story in particular, titled "Abbas Prepares to Get Tough on Hamas and Israel," portrays the leader as non-negotiable by stating in the sub-headline, "The Palestinian president won't work with Israel unless there is substantive progress toward Palestinian statehood." The Huffington Post also places blame on President Barack Obama, stating that the White House had no interest in challenging Israel's hardliners. Recall that the hostile media effect is a phenomenon in which partisans on both sides of an issue perceive media reports to be biased against their side. The theme of land disputes in Israel is direct example of this theory. 7 out of 10 articles are on both sides neutral in reporting the facts about Israeli settlement on Palestinian land. However, in an article by the Times of Israel titled "U.S. Urges Israel to Reverse West Bank Land Seizure," the United States claimed that announcements made by Israel are counterproductive to Israel's stated goal of negotiated 2-state solution with Palestinians. In conclusion, I found that the United States mirrors the reinforcement theory, which is the idea that the media's only power is to reinforce content. The news stories from the United States are facts-based and rely on direct content from Israel and Palestine. I also found that the news stories I have reviewed from Israel are extremely biased against Palestinian Authority and the violence that is ongoing in Gaza. There is little equal time for a Palestinian view to be adequately represented in the news coverage. Gatekeeping is strongly enforced, and most information on Palestine is left out of reporting. Overall, the Palestinian peace process as it presents itself in the media tends to be biased on all sides. The U.S. media blames its own government for the breakdown of negotiations. Israel is critical of Palestine's authority, and many international actors are involved. In Barbie Zelzer's article, "How Bias Shapes the News," she states that bias is inescapable. Social perception of the same event will always look different to different people, and research in journalism has long wrestled with objectivity in reporting. I'd like to thank you for joining me on my report of the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. This is Erica Espindola signing off, and have a good evening.